Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining myself and Vicki. For those who don't know, I'm Patricia Openfaber, and I do a podcast show to help people maximise property values. It's called Maximising Property Values because I'm not very not so good about these things. Anyway, it's on all the popular platforms, podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, which has taken over the podcast platforming from Google, and it's an Audible as well. Usually, that's a monologue that I release on the first of the month every month. But about 2 years ago, I started a guest series because I thought there are people out there with powerful messages that people who listen to my podcast would benefit from also listening to. And today, I am very lucky to have Vicki Wusche with me. So, Vicki, welcome to Maximising Property Values. Now, let me tell the listeners a wee bit about Vicki. So, Vicki, if you go onto Amazon, you will see. So, at the moment, there are 11 books that Vicki has written and published. So, they are. Let me start. So, the Wealthy Retirement Plan and Revolution Guide to Living the Rest of Your Life in Style. Property for the Next Generation, Securing Your Financial Future in Uncertain Times. Now, honestly, people who are listening to this, the one about the Wealthy Retirement Plan, Vicki wrote that in 2019. The one about the next generation, she wrote that in 2018. Now, could it be more useful now, or could it be more useful now? Anyway, then she also wrote Using Other People's Money, How to Invest in Property. Again, another version, Using Other People's Money, How to Invest in Property. Make More Money from Property, From Investor Thinking to a Business Mindset. Again, so there are different versions of the using other people's money. So people go on to Amazon and get these books. The New Estate: Insights from the 22nd Century.
Just to say, that's a story, Patricia, that one.
So
That's if I had a magic wand, what would I do?
oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then so all these books are on there. But Vicki, I would love for you to go deeper, if you're able to, into two of these books,
Yep.
which is the Wealthy Retirement Plan and Property for the Next Generation, because I think that right now, property. There are two lots of people who are, I think, thinking about the future, thinking about what to do regarding property, and one of those people's, they're at the the kind of like older age of property investors and business people and landlords and whatever. So they're looking at retirement, and the other end are people who are just looking to start to come into it. And I think that your books are just so apt for now, especially considering the new legislation which is likely to come in the first half of next year. The Renters' Rights Bill. So Renters' Rights Bill is not going to come in next year, but Renters' Rights Bill of 2024 is likely to be enacted into the Renters' Rights Act of 2025. So considering all of that, Vicki, honestly, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please share with us, share your thoughts, because I'm also dying to hear what you've got to say about those two topics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Patricia. So, like Patricia, yes, I've got the books, but I've also got a podcast called A Wealthy Life. And it is, like Patricia's done, a combination of me doing a monologue sometimes and me having guests. And it taps into three things. So, yes, property investing, but property investing as a means to an end. And that's what we'll talk about in a minute. And along that way, in order for you to use property, which is a way to leverage your time and your money, you have to understand money. So financial intelligence is really, really important. And mindset, because if you don't have the right mindset, then you probably won't even be listening to this anyway. So my podcast talks about essential mindset, essential financial education, and then also as property as a way to leverage what you have, leverage your resources into the life that you want to live. So if I start with a wealthy retirement plan, one of the central tenets in there are the 5 principles, which are it's lovely to make a mnemonic like, oh, it would be fast or it would be happy or something, but it's actually KKRLL. So it's control of your clarity first. So understanding that you even want to do any of this, then control of your finances, and then looking at your resources, then taking your resources and leveraging them, and in leveraging them, creating a legacy. Now, a legacy has many words and many meanings. So, a legacy can be how you wrap up the end of your life and leave a legacy in your will, that type of thing. But actually, I think legacy is more than that. Legacy can be now. What have you done today to make a difference in the world? What did you do yesterday to make a difference in the world? And to, through the clarity you have, know the type of person that you want to be, work towards being that person, that's the mindset, and then live the life that you want to live. And everybody's version of a wealthy life will be different. And it started with the premise that we are going to live longer than we think and longer than we can afford. Because with medical innovations, we will live a lot longer. The idea of retirement is that it was set up back in the day when all the workers were starting to revolt, and employers and factory owners, that type of things, started to turn around to their employees and say, I'll tell you what, when you finish work, I will give you something called a retirement, a pension. And so we're going to have this thing called pension, and I'm going to give that to you when you finish working. And then what they worked out is, how long will my average employee live? And let's say that the average employee lived back in the day till 50. They set the pension at 55. Or if they were going to live at 45, they set the pension at 50. So the idea is that the pension would kick in only after the bulk of people had died. And our whole government pension is based on that. And if you're relying on a government pension, you're at risk, because it is set for people to die and very few people to claim. And that's not the reality. More and more people are living longer. I think the current ages for men and women live a couple of years longer. But the current ages are sort of round about the early 80s. So it depends who you read. So 81, 83, that type of thing for men and women respectively. The point is, we're all supposed to have died when we were 65, and therefore not many people are claiming the pension. Well, you can't have all of these people claiming from the government a pension, and this is why there is going to be, because we like crises, there's going to be a new crisis, which is going to be the pension crisis. This is why the NHS is under so much pressure, because we've created a system that enables people to live longer, but we haven't created the system that enables them to live well longer. And so that's the issue. And so the point of the wealthy retirement plan is, do you really want to end up in a stinky chair in a council care home, having visited relatives, older relatives in the past, when I was, I think, in my late teens, my great auntie, something like that, and she was very wealthy, but she had to go into a care home because she had dementia, and the overwhelming smell when we opened that door was enough to make you heave. And that has stayed with me since my teenage years. I am not going into a care home, and therefore, if I'm not going to a care home, how do I actually want to live my life? And if how I want to live my life is in a certain way, do I want to wait till I'm 65 and a little bit more tired before I can start that? If I know how I want to live, why can't I start now? And that is 30 to 40 years of thinking unpacked in that sentence. So I don't want to make it a complete monologue there,
No,
but
no,
that's
no,
the
no.
first book. That's the wealthy
Yeah.
retirement. That's the thinking to get you there.
Do you know, Vicky? I'm making notes. I am simply making notes because everything that you say is just so true and so apt, and and it really is true. And you see, this is the issue. And do you know another thing that really is bothering me at the moment? Oh, sorry. Oopsie. I should have put that on silent, and I didn't. I apologise. Another thing that's really bothering me right now is that all of the people who should really be paying into pensions, they're all moving to Dubai.
Mhm.
Nearly every kind of like, late 20s to late 30s person that I know has either emigrated or is thinking about emigrating. And I'm thinking, well, do you know, this crisis that you said is coming our way is probably coming a lot sooner than
Yep.
the government even realizes.
Yep.
And so it's so much more important that we know exactly what we're doing. And I have to admit, it's one of the reasons why this new legislation really scares me, because it wouldn't it legislation doesn't normally bother me, because you think to yourself, if you do what's right, then you're going to be okay. But you see, that is on the premise that the legislation is actually fair, and that the
Mhm.
people who will administer the legislation are also going to be fair. Now, I don't know personally, and these are just my personal views for people who might be listening to this. I don't know that all of this is not a way to actually get landlords to pay for their local authorities. To Local authorities are going bankrupt every single year. More and more of them declare whatever it is, section something or other. So not quite bankruptcy, but they can't make their books balance. And I think this is the government's way of actually saying, well, you're not going to get any more money from us, but you can get the money from those greedy landlords.
Oh,
And then,
totally. It's a
and
branding. It's
mm,
absolutely a branding issue where we're seen as greedy landlords and we're seen as bad. And I was speaking to somebody, and I'm going to have him on my podcast in the new year, and we were talking about um, how he was at a conference and they were picketed by the sort of the generation rent tenancy groups, and he got so much hate through Twitter at the time. And what they were doing was they were showing targets with bullets and arrows, like basically iconographic images about death threats to him. And he turned around and he said a message, and he said, if there weren't landlords, where would you live? You hate landlords. You don't want landlords to live, to be around, to exist. You think that there should just be property. Where are you going to live? If you can't afford to buy your own house, where are you going to go and live? Because if you could afford to buy your own house, you'd have bought your house. If your parents could afford to help you, they would have helped you. And now, a landlord, and this is what's missing, we are risking our own savings to buy a property, to bring it up to standard, and to lend it through a fair contract to somebody to live there as a home. And a lot of the people that I'm speaking to at the moment have been tenants in properties for 17 to 40 years, living with landlords. Now, they've not necessarily been treated well by those landlords. 40 years ago, there wasn't all the legislation. It's probably not properly regulated. That's not how landlords work now. But this branding issue is about us being the bad guys. When my experience is, it's the pension companies that are buying up large portfolios, and then they really do not care. They don't have a letting agent managing the pension portfolio, they keep it in house. Those people are just employees. They don't have the experience and understanding of what it really means to be a letting agent. And I've always used a letting agent, and my letting agent has 30 plus years. She's exceptional. She understands building structure, she understands finance, she understands the law, she knows how to work with the council, she knows people and how to work with the people, that this is actually a business. And that nonsense comment about us not working, so people who don't work, they just invest. I work hard at leveraging my time and my money so that I can provide decent homes for people, because I was once a social housing tenant. I once rented a house off of a landlord that had lent his property to the council. And I was eternally grateful for that. And that's what I wanted to do for other people, provide decent homes for people to live in. But having said all of that, it's my money and I'm taking a risk, and I want to be both protected and reimbursed / rewarded for that decision that I've taken, because this is a business. And that's that book, Make More Money from Property, too. You're not just an investor, you're a business owner. You're taking your money and you're choosing to invest it in property as a business, as opposed to books or shoes or selling makeup or engineering parts. It's a regular business. And if you're going to invest your money into a business is only successful if it makes a profit, because the profit is what enables you to reinvest back. So I have to invest my money in a property that I know is worth it, that I know that the rent that I can achieve for it will cover the mortgage, all the maintenance costs and everything else. Because why would I pay to allow a stranger to live in my house when I could just put someone I wanted to live in my house, a friend? If I'm going to give away a property for free, I may as well give it away to somebody that I love rather than a complete stranger. And so a lot of the arguments that come through Generation Rent are very much about, well, affordability. Why should I have to go through an affordability check to rent your property? Well, because I want to know that you can afford to pay the rent. But you should be forced to rent me the house even if I can't afford it. I mean, what nonsense are these conversations? We're sort of way up a pendulum swing that just needs to come back and be sensible. And I think that's where we get into this idea of property for the next generation. Historically, we have created our own sense of self-worth about whether you own your own home or you're a renter. And if you're a renter, somehow you're a second-class citizen. That's not true. And the book, Property for the Next Generation, the message there is, and it's based on the story of my oldest daughter wanting to buy a house and coming to me and saying, Mum, you buy houses, will you buy me one? I went, nah, that's not the way it works. These houses are bought for investment purposes. I'll show you how to do it. And explaining to her that you do not have to live in the house that you own. You do not have to own the house that you live in. You just need to own property. And if you can't afford to buy, if you're based somewhere in the South, you can't afford to buy property in the South, but you have savings, but you could take those savings and make them worth more money, both in terms of your rental income revenue and the capital appreciation, which is not guaranteed, by buying something further away from where you live and renting it out to someone who needs a house and who will keep that property and pay the rent to you. Then you could invest your money, and then at some point, when you've settled, when you've got to the point in your career where you're not going to be job hopping in order to get the promotions and to get the pay rises, when you're not property hopping because first you're single, then you're in a relationship, then you've got your first child, then you've got your second child, now you're settling down because your children are going into school, you buy your home or want to buy your home in the place that you want to settle for the next few years, then maybe you sell one of the properties that you've already invested in over maybe what was 10, 15 years you've been investing in property. You've been squirreling your money into property, and now you've got either surplus rental income or you've got property that you could remortgage and release equity that would provide you with a deposit to live in the place that you want, because you started early, rather than following society's, I don't know, almost like Instagram, Facebook happy pictures of what you should be doing. Think of the maths and do it the sensible way.
You know, Vicky, you are so right. And this is what, so I did actually submit I responded to Parliament's call for evidence about the bill, and I don't know that anyone would have read it. But one of the things I said was that education will help a lot more than all of this negativity. I'm paraphrasing now,
Yep.
because your daughter wanted to do something, didn't know how to do it, but she knew where to go. Similar story with my eldest son. He finished uni, went to work in Toronto, came back after about 5 years. So I said, okay, you're back in the UK now. It was actually during COVID. He said, oh, he's a very social person. He needs, that social interaction, and could not bear the lockdowns. So decided to come back home. More than welcome. So I said, okay, you need to now start thinking about buying your own place. And he literally immediately said to me, Mum, that's a different generation. I think my signal is coming in and out because I'm in one of my flats. I
Yeah,
hope you
yeah,
can
we
still
can still
hear
hear
me.
you.
Okay, great stuff. He said, no, that was your generation, Mum. I'm a different generation. We can't afford to buy. So around about that time, I used to do these workshops because it was lockdown. We all did that. We're all on Zoom, and that was how we all lived. So I said, look, come to the workshop, but you're not coming for free. You'll pay for it, because when people pay for things, they pay attention. And even though he's my
Yes.
son, and I could the very next week turn around and give him more than what he'd paid me to come onto this work, they'll come and do this workshop with me. I said, no, you're going to pay for it. Anyway, his dad paid for him. and and after the first day, so it was a 4-day workshop, 4 half-day workshops. And after the first one, he said, Mum, I want to do this. And I thought, wow. So I sat down with him, told him what he needed to do, and he, within 6 months, he'd found a place. Within the year, he'd completed on his purchase,
Brilliant.
and he still lives there now. So the point that I'm making is, a lot of these young people, they've been told that they can't afford.
Yes.
They believe they can't afford. And that's
Yes.
what I'm saying. Do you know, there's so much education out there. And I'm happy that, I'm happy to share. You're happy to share. So many people are happy to share. There are so many forums where people can just go and say, oh, how can I do it? And they'll be told how to do it. But because somebody else has told them negatively,
Yeah.
they can't, they believe they can't, and then they start being resentful
Yes.
towards people who are doing it. And it's like, oh, do you know, that person is the one who's stopping me from having my own place. But it's all lies. And
Yeah.
like you say, mindset, if you're going to do it. When I first bought, the reason why I bought was because, and property has always been a problem in England. It has always. It's not that affordability and everything is not a new thing. Lack of decent properties is not a new thing. And I remember back then, and I was renting, and I remember going on all these viewings, and there'd be queues outside the door, and I was never, ever the one picked to actually rent these properties. And well, obviously, I can't go into the minds of landlords. And I just thought, oh, that's not fair. I can afford it. Why am I not getting, the chance to actually rent these properties? And it immediately occurred to me that, the solution to my problem was to buy my own, and then I wouldn't be, subject to anyone, deciding, however they're deciding, whether or not to rent their property to me. It is their money, it is their property. And that's how I started. And, and it's just literally, with some of these young people, all of my godchildren, their siblings, they're all now owners, because they know who to go to. They can come to me and say, oh, do you know, Auntie, I'm thinking about doing this. How do I do it? And it's just that. Nobody is going to charge, young people to tell them how to do it. They just need to reach out and stop, in my opinion, stop being negative, and have clarity about who they are and what they're worth. And that, I think, is mainly the issue.
Yeah, I think it's very much that. I mean, I think the role that social media has played, there's the positive side of people being able to connect, but then there's also you know, the negative side of, is anything that you're connecting with actually real anymore? And we're getting so into these devices. It was different when social media was just on your computer, so you had to sit at your desk and you use your computer, but now it's on your phone. You're on social media 24 hours a day, and you're being influenced by the imagery that others are presenting, whether it's pictures or whether it's through words, and you don't actually know whether that's real. And it's going to get more and more difficult when we get into AI over the next couple of years. But the end of it is, and that's why, you know, my three things that I talk about all the time in my podcast is mindset, understanding the financials, and then if property is the right journey for you, then great, property investment. But if not, you would still have the mindset and the financial understanding to make more informed decisions. And I think that's what's wrong. And I don't think our education, right from the little ones in primary school right the way through to secondary school and university, that we are preparing people to cope in a modern world. And with due respect to the tiny, tiny photos I can see of you, you know, you're not school age people, although I can't clearly see it and I might blame my glasses, but you're not necessarily school age people. So you won't have learnt it in school because it probably wasn't even invented while you were in school. And so you're now out there, people in their 30s and their 40s and maybe even in their 50s, faced with, yes, increased cost of living, increased mortgage costs, although I would say they're still the same as when I first started out 20 years ago. This is the norm, but we've had that dip and everybody's saying, oh, mortgages are so expensive. No, this is the norm for mortgages, base rate around 4 or 5%. But the houses themselves have increased in value. You know, when you actually look, because obviously being a sado, I do this sort of thing. I look back to how much was a house originally bought for and what did it sell for, and the history of the buying and selling of properties, and looking at how much house prices are going up. Some of that, I have to say, is due to estate agency marketing. I've got an example of a property that we went up and we viewed last week for one of my sourcing clients. So I help clients who want to invest in property, either by teaching them or by doing it for them. And one of my clients wants to buy a property, so I've been up to view some, and there is this property on a street that I know. So 5 years ago, literally just before lockdown, we bought a property at 80,000 on this street, number one. And we got that obviously at a bit of a discount. Let's say that the street value really should be 90,000. Well, the house that I'm looking at now is on the market for 115. Why would that street from 90,000 have gone up to 115,000? That's a 27% increase in property price in that one street up in the north in a 5 year period. That's not a true reflection of property prices. It's not a true reflection of this street. It's not a true reflection of actually the value of that specific house, which has dodgy double glazing that doesn't work properly at the front of the house, and all the double glazing at the front of the house in Victorian bays, which are a bit more expensive, will have to be replaced. The landlord has not done any major works for this tenant who has lived there, I think she said 7 years, this particular tenant. This is her home. And so, for example, when there's been a leak, it's just been patched, it's not been done properly. There was some work done to one wall where they did some plastering, but it hasn't been painted. So this woman's been living with an unpainted bare plaster wall for years. She's got two young children in the house. And I look at it and I think, well, yeah, the landlord's done bits, but they haven't kept this, obviously, because there is a tenant in there and it's very difficult to go in and refurbish completely when a tenant is in there. But it's also not a property that had been fully refurbished 7 years ago. And yet somehow you want a 27% increase on the value of that street. So some of it is the estate agents greed because their commission is based on the sale price. Some of it is based on the delusions of, and whether they're landlords, residential, or even sometimes when it's a probate property, you know, when an older relative dies and then there's a number of people that all want to get their share of the will, and the house needs, you know, 30 to 40,000 pounds worth of refurb spent on it to bring it up to modern standards, new boilers, new electrics, new gas, and then we get knocked for it as landlords, and yet family members had left granny living in a house like this. So I think the whole thing is that we are in a society where owning your own home is considered the goal. If you don't own your own home, you're less of a person. If you own your own home and now you move on and you buy property and you help other people live in properties, bearing in mind that the government is, and not just this government, successive governments, woefully behind their ability to build. There is so much derelict land out there. There are so many derelict properties out there. And they're little bits, little pockets of land, little individual houses that the big builders aren't going to come along and deal with those. The only people who are going to turn round these rundown, derelict little houses are going to be the investor, because there isn't the cash there for a private person to come in and buy a probate unless you've got family members with the skills to show up to get our residential mortgage on a property that is not worth it, quite frankly, and then still have another £40,000 worth of cash to bring it up to standard. There are very, very few residential buyers out there that have either the skills or the cash to do that. And on that basis, it is only us that can turn these properties round and bring them back into use. Nearly all of my tenants at one point, up until about 2018, were on benefits. Nearly all of my tenants, bar one, were single parents with children. And that is because, as I said, I was a social housing tenant and I just wanted to be able to provide decent homes for families with children, because if you do that and those children have a decent, dry, warm, healthy home to live in, they can focus on their education when they go to school. If they've got a house that's with mold, or a house that's dripping with damp, or they don't feel safe in the property because the doors or the windows don't close, or whatever else it is, that's not conducive to you then, one, being in a position where you can get on with the rest of your life. And I don't know how we, I just don't know how we change this branding issue other than constantly releasing stories that are about the positive impact that landlords make. I think our positive stories have to outweigh the negatives.
You know, Vicky, I completely agree with you. And, you know, sadly, there are tenants out there who are getting a bit of a raw deal.
Mm,
But I think the majority of tenants are actually getting, you know, an acceptable, if not very good deal.
yeah,
But the people who moan and moan the loudest are the people who garner attention. Now, you know, a friend of mine, and this is what is scaring me about this new bill. So this friend of mine rented a house to someone, and and I think he no. Then the tenant deliberately caused damage in the place. No, that's not how it went. He wanted the place back. That was it. He wanted the place back and served notice. Then the tenant deliberately caused damage in the place. So when he went to court, I think they stopped paying rent, and that's why he served notice on them to get possession. So then they caused the damage, then they went to court, and this tenant, he said he could not believe what he was looking at and what he was hearing. She burst into tears and she played the victim so convincingly. He said that had he not been involved himself, he would have believed her. Anyway, she was believed by the court. He didn't get possession. Guess what he did? he flogged that place at a discount in an auction.
Mm.
So it's that really scares me of, the tenants who will play the system, who will cause damage in our properties because they've been told that if they go and complain to the council, they might get 2 years of their rent back under a rent repayment order, or and or if you look at them wrong, or no, if they believe you've looked at them wrong or funny, that they could go and report you to the council or do something, and the council could fine you. If they fine you, it's up to £7,000. If they can find more than one thing to fine you on, within a period of 5 years, it's then up to £40,000. So I think the whole landscape is just completely changing, which is why I personally, no, I'm not, I'm no longer happy to rent to individuals.
Mm.
And because I had a pension, I put it in, I had a SIPS pension. And I thought, I'm not going to break any pension rules, because if you have a pension and you want to invest in property, it has to be commercial property. It's not my bag. I wasn't going to do that. So I cashed in my pension. It wasn't tax efficient to do it, but I thought, I'm happy to do it. One, because then I'll have complete control over my money. Two, because I'll be providing really lovely homes for people. And three, because I'm actually just building a pension pot for myself, so that when I'm no longer able to do stuff myself, maybe my children might take over if they want to, or I can farm it out to an agency, and I will still have a regular income, because, like you were saying, people are living longer, and people won't be able to afford to live longer. And that is what I had in mind when I thought, a regular income might be a good way forward. But I feel that my pension is now going to be at risk with this new legislation. And it may well be that I just don't understand what's going on. But I've looked at it in great detail, and I can see where innocent people, might get caught. And also, I don't even know what the law means anymore, because in this bill, all the legal principles that allowed us to say with certainty, with lawyers, if you have an issue, you can go to a lawyer and say, this is my issue, please can you give me some advice? And they will say, right, based on what you've told me, you can do this, or you can do that, or this, and that will be lawful, and that will be okay, and this. I don't know that any of that can stand anymore, and it's a shame. I feel it's a big shame on the government in trying, and this is me being political, so please forgive me, but people who listen to this anyway will know me. So it's the governments, the various governments, first the Conservative government and now the Labour government, trying to buy votes, and
Oh,
they're
totally.
and they're causing so much damage that they can't even see. So first of all, so the freehold and leasehold reform, where they said, oh, this was Gove, we're doing away with marriage value. I thought, wow, how can you as a government just do that? Because there are people relying on these things. I can understand if they said any lease created from today or tomorrow or next year, this is how it's going to work for them, and
Mm.
leave the existing leases to be dealt with under the existing legislation. But no, they had to go and cause havoc. People don't know what they have. Pensions have invested in these things. So there are going to be other people who are expecting a pension who are not going to be able to, anyway. So that's one thing. And with the rights bill, again, what do we have? We have the government saying, if your lease says this, no, forget about it. This is what it now means. And I'm just thinking, you can't do that, especially if you're trying to attract investment into your country, because people now are going to be told, you bring your money into the UK, as of today, this is how this is what your exposure might be, but the government might turn around next year and change it.
Yeah, I think there's a few points here, Patricia. So number one, I went to the NRLA conference last week, which is the National Residential Landlords Association conference on the bill. And it was really interesting listening to what they had to say about it. I think the room was, I won't say they're very positive still about property, and they were probably 50-50 about the legislation. Everybody agrees that the legislation is about vote winning. There's a whole nonsense at the moment where you're saying that the bill will come in the first half of next year. They've cut short the consultation. It's now going back for its third reading, and there was talk at the conference that they think that they're trying to push this in before Christmas. We'll see how that goes. And that's literally an ego thing. That is about, I don't care what anybody has to say, I'm going to get this bill over and I'm going to get this bill through Parliament because the Conservatives didn't get the bill through, and I'm going to get it through, and I'm going to show how clever we are. There was an opportunity here to completely streamline some archaic legislation. And what did they say? Something like 170 odd laws and regulations that apply to property that we could have streamlined and made everything much clearer for people. But that Parliament or government is not about doing the right thing for the people. They're about doing what will ensure they get voted in the next 4 years. So they're only looking at things that will give benefit. And yes, you're absolutely right. Bringing in legislation. I mean, if we go back to Osborne and Section 24, where he changed the tax legislation to do with properties, and that's why everybody now buys in a limited company. There were people who had for years, 20, 30 years, bought in their own names because that was the way that we were able to fund it. So we funded it through personal buy-to-let mortgages. And by retrospectively changing the legislation, he's wiped out people's pensions. And they're doing the same thing again. That's what they're missing. That the majority of small landlords, two things. One, they are helping supply housing where government has failed. And two, they are creating their own pensions, which will remove them as a future liability for the government, because we won't need to claim off of the government because we'll be self-funding. And by fiddling in the property market or anything else without thinking of the implications, that is a problem. But in terms of the bill itself, I think the key thing here is that if you have always, and this goes back to the Make More Money from Property book, if you've always understood that what you were in was a business and you've acted professionally, I actually don't have any worries about my tenants, and I'm just going to touch wood just to be sure, but I don't. So during COVID, for example, I was on the phone a lot to people that I knew who were in the property business, who were panicking. They'd all done very complicated things like, rent to rent HMOs and things like that. So they'd got rent to rents, so properties they didn't own. They were committed to paying other people in order to pay the mortgage, and they weren't sure that their tenants were going to pay them, and so they were going to evict everybody, and they were going to hand the properties back, and they were going to sack everybody. And we were only in the first month of COVID when I had one very specific conversation that I remember. And then talking that person down from the edge and going, right, how much money do you need on a monthly basis to feed and fund your family? And let's say the answer was £3,000. How much money do you have in savings? And let's say the answer was £24,000. I said, so for a start, out of savings, without doing anything else, you can live for 8 months. So in 8 months from now, things will have changed. Either the zombies will have come for us or we'll be out the other side, or clear about where the end is going to be. Fine. So now that you can take off the panic about money worries, now let's look at each of these things. If you let this person go and we open up next week or the week after, you've lost all of that knowledge out of your business. How can we keep that person running? Well, there's the furlough scheme. So why don't you furlough them and then actually give them the money that you can get from the government? And just talking people through all of this chaos. And then the other thing is, for my portfolio at the time during COVID, I did not lose any rent at all. Every single one of my tenants paid. I had one tenant contact me and pay me what was effectively 6 weeks late because they were due to get money through the furlough scheme, but the furlough scheme took time to get going. They spoke to us straight away and said they didn't have the money to pay the rent. We said it's fine. They said they were going to pay 6 weeks later, and they actually then paid, and they paid both sets of money when the furlough money came through. They were absolutely fine. They are still in my property, and they have been in my property for 7, 8 years now. And like I say, never missed a payment. I then had one property where we were due to do the viewing. So we just had a tenant move out. We'd done a full refurb. We'd got all the viewings booked on the Friday, and we were going to go into lockdown on the Monday. And the letting agent said to me, I do not feel, I know that we're locking down on the Monday, but I do not feel that it's appropriate to bring my staff into a house, even with masks and gloves on, and tenants in potential tenants into a property where we're going to be mixing in a space. So I want to call off these viewings. And half of me wanted to shout, no, no, do them, because I knew I was going to be empty. And the other half of me went, no, you're right. And so we had one property that remained empty for 3 months until we opened up, and then we were able to do the viewings and do virtual viewings and things like that. And that property has been empty, has been full with the same tenant ever since. And so I think the thing is, if you're professional about the way you conduct your property business, then changes in legislation are like changes in petrol price for taxi drivers, or the congestion charge for taxi drivers, or a change in the cost of insurance or road tax, or whatever the rules are. You know, that you just adapt. We have always thoroughly vetted all of our tenants, and I think that's a key thing. And I'm just working with my letting agent at the moment on what I hope will be a series of educational videos about what it means to truly vet and understand and verify your tenants. We always have our tenants with a working guarantor. So there is, I feel, minimal risk for me. If my tenants do not pay the rent, I have got someone I can go to because I have got a guarantor for them. And I think all that's going to do is make it harder for tenants to rent properties, because then if you cannot meet these requirements, which is you've got to have the affordability of the property, and now I want you to show up with a guarantor or maybe an extra deposit or whatever route landlords take in order to make themselves feel protected and less vulnerable in letting their property to somebody else, it's just going to put more and more barriers in the way of people that need housing. And when I think about the original tenants, you know, all those single mums that I had, you know, not all of those single mums could have come up 20 years ago when I was first doing it with working guarantors. But what I learnt in that first 5 years is that some people can't be trusted, and you can be nice to them. And I used to buy a pot plant for a new tenant, and, you know, welcome to your new home. And I still had one girl walk out and leave me with £800 worth of arrears. And I thought to myself, I'm not doing this again. I'm not putting myself in the position where I become emotionally involved in providing you a home. There is an emotional story behind it, but I'm going to put on this professional glass door between us, and that glass door is going to require you to behave in a certain way before we have a relationship, before I let you become a tenant to my property, and becoming much more strict about it. And so you won't get a welcome to your new home in a pot plant now, but you will get a decent home that is fully compliant, and I will have thoroughly vetted you and know that we are going to be in a relationship for a long term. One of the other changes that is coming through the legislation is the fact that a tenant can give 2 months' notice at any point, whereas currently you carry out an assured short hold tenancy in AST, and that's typically for 6 months, and then the tenant has to stay for, say, 4 months before they can give 2 months' notice to quit at the end. And now they could give 2 months' notice on day one. Why would a tenant go through the whole process of being vetted to get a property, bearing in mind that in some parts of the country there are more than 20 people wanting to rent per single vacancy? That's the mismatch that we have in terms of supply and demand. So you manage to get yourself a property that you can afford and that you have been verified for and that you're going to move in, and then why would you move out again within 2 months' notice? The only reason you would move out is if that landlord had somehow lied or deceived you in terms of the property, that the property was, I know you do HMOs, Patricia, I'm sure yours aren't like this, but if you were renting a room in an HMO and one of the tenants was disruptive or unpleasant in some way, or you were moving into a house that was a 3-bedroom property and supposed to be C-rated EPC, but actually it was drafty and maybe it didn't have enough insulation in the roof or something, or the heating bills were extreme, or you said that you're a professional landlord, but you don't respond to repairs, then the relationship breaks down. But that's the only reason I can imagine that a tenant would want to move out. Yes, occasionally I have perfectly decent tenants moving in, and then they either get a new boyfriend, or the boyfriend or the partner or the wife or the girlfriend leave and they can't afford it. And that's a bit of life. But for a lot of the tenants, my tenants, they move in and they stay, and they're not a problem. And bearing in mind, it's not just my portfolio, but because I do this for other clients, and I've been doing this now for 14 years for all my clients, and I stay actively involved in their portfolios. We don't have problems with the tenants because of how we process them up front. And so maybe I'm being naive and overly optimistic. I still don't like the legislation that's coming in, but I think that we will all just, like surfing, we'll change our balance and we'll ride this wave, because we know that what we're doing is providing decent homes for decent people where the government is failing, and that's a message they won't like to hear. And we are doing something proactively about our own futures, about our own wealthy retirement plans, so that we do not have to rely, because they can't be rely on the government to provide for us in our old age, because they can't be trusted. And I think, if you start spinning the message back the other way around, I don't think the government would like it if everybody talked about how the government can't be trusted. And there's been a lot of that just in this first 100 days, and I won't get political, but whether you want to talk about pensions or anything else, what the government is already doing and what they've done in the budget is not what they said they were going to do when they wanted to get elected. And that's the thing, you just got to understand, we live in a society that requires some form of, I'm going to use the word overlord, some sort of overlord that can organise emptying the bins and filling the potholes, not that they do, and protecting us through the police and providing a level of healthcare or whatever else for emergencies, for when you get run over or you get a heart attack. The NHS is incredible, and that comes with a price. We think we can rely on them, and we have forgotten that we can't. We have to create our own futures. Whether you're as far ahead as wanting a wealthy life and whatever that means to you, wealthy isn't about money, it's about how you want to spend your time. That whether you want to do that, or whether you just want to live a peaceful life, which is to my mind also a wealthy life, you have to make the plan. I was speaking with someone on a podcast this morning, and he asked me, what would your mantra, your message to people be? And I would say, you can do anything, be anything that you want. It just takes a plan. And the sooner you start that plan, the better.
Do you know, Vicky, you could not be more right. And you're absolutely you see, for me, it's not about the non-payment of rent that scares me in the proposed legislation. Not a problem, because every single tenant that I take in, just like you, I vet them thoroughly, and I either take out rent guarantee insurance on them, or in fact, I always take that out, whether or not they have a guarantor. So if they have a guarantor, again, I do the checks on the guarantor, and I
Yeah.
make sure that I have my policy in place to make sure that my rent always gets paid, subject to deductibles and all whatnot. But let me just so it's the unfairness and not being able to trust. That is the issue that I have. So 29 different pieces of legislation are being changed in this new bill, 29. And one of them is the Criminal Justice and Police Act 2001. Now, if you were to Google that act, Google will tell you that it's an act to make provision for combating crime and disorder. How on earth, on what planet does that become relevant to people being landlords? And this is what really scares me about it, because I'm thinking, am I missing something? Why is that in there? Why is it? And it's also about tenants being able to just lie and create a situation. Let me give you an example of something. So my husband is a practicing solicitor. He had a client come to him because the council were going to fine this lady for not having an HMO, either additional or the
Mandatory licensing.
mandatory license. So and she said, no, I only let it to, I think it was additional. So she let it to 3 people, or something. She let it to, no, it was mandatory. They said she didn't have a mandatory license. There was no additional licensing in place in, where his client was. So no, she'd let it to 4 people. But there was an extra bedroom. And I think when it was being let, the people were told, they were asked, how many people are going to live here? They wrote it all down because she used a lettings and managing agent. When the managing agent went round to do a 6-month inspection, he saw that it appeared as if somebody was living in this spare room, which
Yep.
was going to be a study for these people. He asked them about it, and he was told, oh no, they just had a guest. One of them had a guest, and the room was not being permanently used. But what these people had done is they then went to the council and complained and said they were living in an HMO and it wasn't licensed. So the council immediately came round and said, no, there are 5 people living here. You do need, a license. And you now need to have your fire doors and all whatnot, all the rest of the stuff that you need to have for HMOs, which is fine because that is safety and you do want people to be safe. Now, it didn't just end there. So the landlord said, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then something happened and she couldn't finish the works within the time frame she'd been given. So she went back to the council and said, oh, I won't be able to finish it within this time. Can I have another month or something like that? And the council said, yes, you can have another month. Now, the tenants were not aware of the fact that she'd been given extra time within which to do this. And this is what scares me, because these guys were professional tenants trying to scam landlords. So they'd engineered this HMO situation. Anyway, so they then applied to the FTT, the First Tier Tribunal Property Chamber, for a rent repayment order on the basis that she was supposed to have licensed it and she didn't do the work. She had an improvement notice and she didn't do anything. So this was when my husband was then brought on board. Now, when the evidence came to light, it was obvious that these guys were playing the system. They knew what they had to do, and they literally were just waiting for the landlord to not, do the works within the period that the council had initially said. But she didn't breach anything because she'd agreed with the council for an extension. So they didn't get the money that they were planning to get. But what I'm trying to say is there are people out there who will do things like that. And okay, my husband's client was fortunate that she had an independent person who could actually say, well, I went round on this day, I asked this question, this is what I was told by so and so, by so and so. When they came in, this is what we were told. So it was so obvious what was going on.
I think the thing here is, though, Patricia, is if you speak to a policeman or you speak to a solicitor, and the same as if you speak to a doctor, these are people that you only go to when you're in trouble and you see one side. That's it. I mean, nobody, with due respect to a solicitor, ever goes to a solicitor for a happy thing, do they? I don't know what happy things you might go to a solicitor.
But no, but you see, the thing is, Vicky, this is just one example.
Yeah.
How many more of them might there be out there? So these
Yeah, but
guys
there
wanted to
might
live
be,
there and
there
live there
might
for
be
free.
loads. Yeah, there might be loads. There might not be. There might be people out there that are professional tenants. But the key thing here is that if you had properly referenced, not, no, sorry, that sounds judgy. If you always properly reference your tenants so that you are absolutely sure of them, then it's a much easier experience. And there's loads of other things that we could talk about, like, again, when I've done HMOs, I would never leave if I had a small bedroom, the door would be locked, because you know what's going to happen. You know that sooner or later they're going to bring a mate round, and either that mate's going to stay on the Friday night, and then they'll stay Friday, Saturday nights, and then the next weekend they'll stay for 4 days, and then before you know it, they have a problem with their house and they're moving in. It's different if they're trying to sleep on the couch in the communal living area. It's a different experience if they're nicking the bedroom up there. And again, I did that through experience years ago when we had one small bedroom, and that's it. We wouldn't use the small bedroom. We started to convert the small bedrooms into en suites in the end, so that we made use of the space. We increased the value of the room that was next door. Someone had an ensuite room, and then the other two or three would then share a bathroom. But we cut out space that anybody else, unless they want to go and live in a cupboard, that anybody else can move into. I think the key thing for me here is that we can always look at everything through positive eyes or negative eyes. And if your purpose is strong, if your intention is resolute, if your business and approach and strategy, and then ultimately the technique that you choose to use to implement your strategy, is professional, that is all we can do. We could be in absolutely anything. If you don't put your money in property and you put your money in savings, and back in the day you put your money in Northern Rock, you could have been in trouble there. There's always risks to everything. And that's what being professional is looking for what those risks are. And from that lesson that you've just told about the HMO, and even the lesson before, what can one now implement in one's own business processes and systems to make sure that you could identify those issues in advance? And I think that's it. It's just an opportunity to learn. And as long as we live in a society where an overlord is necessary, and I think it is, to avoid chaos, the problem is the overlords are human beings with egos, and the Renters' Rights Bill, stroke, soon to be act, whatever, is very much an ego issue. And I can say that categorically. Yes, it's an opinion, but prove me wrong. Because if it wasn't an ego that was driving that bill, if it was someone who sat down with, for example, the NRLA, some experienced landlords, some uh, newer or smaller landlords, somebody with some experience, some letting agents, for example, as well, and sat down and went, right, we've got a clean sheet of paper. How can we simplify this process? Because what we really want to do is enable all of those people that are costing the government huge amounts of money by being put up in hotels and move them out into these properties that are too small for the big builders to be bothered about. And we want to work with the local councils and the local landlords so that we can actually create decent homes for decent people, save the money on the hotel. Every time you took a tenant from a hotel that was costing the government money, you should get a grant to improve the property. So to replace the roof, to put solar panels on, to do the installation or whatever else, do something to improve that property with the money that you have saved from 1 year's rent in a hotel. That's where the crime is. The crime is in the amount of money that the government is spending / wasting on housing people in hotels when there are empty homes that could be used, and we are the people that could be making a difference. And it is the ego of government and ministers and more importantly, civil servant who are driving through a bill and constantly fiddling generally all over the place with things without understanding the consequences of their acts, without actually speaking to the people that are involved in the businesses and sitting them down and asking, you're in this day to day, how can we make a difference? How can we solve the problem rather than punish the not guilty? Gosh, she says, not being political at all.
Honestly, Vicky, it's, you're so absolutely right. But you see, and this is why I'm loving the discussion that we're having here, because it's all about people having the right kind of information. And when
Mm.
I, for instance, like when I found out about, those guys and my husband's clients, I was so taken aback because I did not realize that there were people out there who would deliberately try and entrap a landlord for their own financial gain. So, for me, the rights bit is not for me, but all I'm doing is I'm just saying to people, don't sleepwalk into it. And
Oh,
I
totally.
and I remember doing a podcast, when I found out about this shocking situation and saying, what, the people at risk, which is what you were saying, look at where your business might be at risk, and then put things into place to make sure that you're not going to get caught. And I was saying, if you're renting out, let's say, a 2-bedroom flat in an additional license area, you let it out to 2 friends, not a problem because it's not an HMO. However, you are at risk if one of them then brings in a partner to live with them to share the bills. Because by doing that, they've turned it into an HMO. It's an additional license area. You should then be applying for a license for it. But if you don't know about what's going on in your property, you can't apply for a license for it. So it's like you said, Vicky, knowing where the risks lie
Absolutely.
and knowing what to do
And
about
that's
them.
why I
But
like simple buy to lets to families. It's a family. You know,
yeah, yeah.
I think your end of the world is more complicated. And we used to do that, I think 12 to 2016, something like that. We were over in Lincoln doing HMOs. And it is a minefield. But a simple buy to let is a simple buy to let. That doesn't mean to say there are no risks, but it certainly does bring down the pressure by knowing that what you're doing is providing a decent home for a family. What I would just say, because I'm conscious of times and I don't want to miss this opportunity, but to Michelle, Remus, Sean and Abolia, if any of you want one of my books, just drop me an email, say that you listened to this Clubhouse. My email is Vicky, you can see my name spelt up there, Vicky at wusche-associates.co.uk. Drop me an email, tell me that you listened to this and let me know which one of the books you want. And I will happily put the books in the post for you, as a thank you for listening, but as part of this idea of sharing knowledge. That's what we're here for. That's what Patricia's here for. That's what this series is here for. And I think, if I can share a book with you, and if you end up listening to this podcast afterwards on all the different platforms, if you drop me an email, yeah, I'll still send it to you as well. Um,
And if
and,
you
and
if
I
you
just want to say thank you for this opportunity to
oh,
share.
Vicky, thank you. And guys, if you can't remember Vicky's email address, you know my email address. Email me and I will share it with you. No problems whatsoever. So
Thank
honestly, Vicky, thank you. And I think I actually misrepresented my position earlier when I said I'm not going to be dealing with individual tenants. That is for self-contained accommodation. I'm actually still going to be keeping a couple of HMOs. I do love my HMOs. It's the individual ones that the flats that, and I'm not into houses that I'm going to be ditching. But Vicky, do you know what? We could talk about this forever, and I
you.
think people will still be talking about this in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time,
Yes.
because reform. Nobody would argue reform is required. But it's how it's done, how it's implemented, and you're absolutely right about this being an ego thing, because there's no way it should be rushed through at the pace at which it's being rushed through. The committee stage was supposed to close on the 28th of November,
Yes.
or was going to continue up until then. When did it close? On the 7th, 3 weeks early. So
Yeah. Because he's not interested in what anybody's got to say. And like
yeah.
you said right at the beginning, you responded. Will they listen? No. No, they're not interested.
Oh,
And so what you need to be doing, what we all need to be doing, is decide how we want to be, how we want to live, what our version of a wealthy life is, and then make a plan. And that plan will have to adapt over the years. All plans do. That's what a plan is. It's a template and you improve on it. And that's all we need to do. And we've just got to do our own things.
and for everyone else, apart from Vicki being an author, she also sources. So if you're looking for something and it's in her area, again, there's a reason to contact Vicki. You know, she educates, she sources, and as you know, she's written the books. And you know, if you can't remember her email address, contact me, and I will be able to put you through. And also, Vicki is on Instagram. Vicki, do you want to give us your Instagram handle?
Yes, it's Vicki _Wusche, so VICKI _WUSCHE. I'm also on Facebook. I've got a YouTube channel. There's the podcast, which is called A Wealthy Life. That's on Apple and Spotify. So just connect. And when you connect, just let me know that you're one of the people that have been listening. So it's been absolutely great speaking with you. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Patricia.
No, thank you for coming.